I'm Ralph Preston. William Lowe and I are back doing another roadmap, and tonight we're going to talk about a topic I find interesting and one I used in my recovery. That's the concept of getting outside your comfort zone and challenging yourself. The brain typically learns by being challenged. We've talked about that before on roadmap, and it also learns from an enriched environment, or as William calls it, a stimulating environment. And you don't find that around your house. We all have our little routines around the house, and we don't have those experiential things coming at us unless we get outside our comfort zone. In a lot of cases, get outside of our house. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. And I actually used this as a stepping stone in my recovery. So I think we're going to start us off a little bit on enriched and what you call stimulating environment that facilitates learning.
Yeah, sure thing. I can kick us off. So I think when it comes to recovery after stroke, the main determinant of your recovery is going to be how much you actually challenge your brain to get out of its comfort zone and really push the boundaries of what it's actually capable of doing, so that you can teach your brain how to recover more of those pathways which might have been damaged or lost after your stroke. Now, when it comes to enriched environments, this is basically a scientific term which is used in stroke research to describe situations after stroke where individuals who have suffered a brain injury or stroke have found that they've recovered a lot more because they've been surrounded in environments where there have been ample opportunities to exercise or to apply a lot of the things that their brain has learned. So when it comes to enriched environments or stimulating environments, this basically means that you're in an environment where you're basically forcing your brain to apply what it's already learned, or you're exposing your brain to the experiences of things which you wanted to learn, which is basically the reason why when you have a stroke in the early days, stroke survivors generally see the most improvements, because in the early days you're in a rehab hospital, and when you're in a rehab hospital, what you're getting there is you're getting a lot of accountability from physical therapists. They're all always telling you to get up and forcing you to walk or forcing yourself to exercise. And because of the social interaction and because of everything that people are throwing at you in a rehab hospital, that in itself is an enriched environment, which is why we tend to see a giant spike of improvement or in recovery during those early days of recovery after stroke. But what tends to happen after a period of time, especially after insurance finishes and when you get discharged, is it becomes a lot harder to challenge your brain to actually improve very quickly and see changes as quickly as you used to in the very early days, because now you're in a situation where your brain has probably passed the 6-month mark, or probably past the 3 or 4 month mark. And here your brain has already been exposed to all of the experiences of exercise from the early days. And so what you need to do now in order to move the needle forward in your recovery is to actually expose your brain to new ways of applying what it's already learned, to help justify to your brain why it needs to work harder to actually recover what was lost, or work a lot more efficiently to rewire those connections so that you can do things like you used to before you had your stroke. And the way I like to think about this is recovery after stroke. It's kind of like an Olympian training for the Olympics. So when you look at Olympians, like for example, someone like Usain Bolt, the reason why someone like Usain Bolt is so good is because every single day what they're doing is they're applying the exact same skill that they've done hundreds and hundreds of times, but they're always doing this under different conditions and different time constraints. And because they're constantly challenging their brain to different variables, whether this be weather conditions or a different time constraint, their brain constantly has to justify to itself that it has to work harder to become a lot more efficient in performing a skill, or in other words, in expanding that blueprint in the brain, which is responsible for performing that movement or that skill in the first place. So for those of you who have watched my blueprint presentation, and I'm not sure if you have, but basically in recovery after stroke, the way that your brain learns a new skill is when it's exposed to a movement or exposed to an exercise, your brain creates a little bit of scaffolding in the brain, which is composed of everything which is required to perform that movement. So, for example, if you're trying to open up your hand, there are many components which go into a blueprint in the brain. For example, it might be what the movement feels like, what the movement looks like, and what types of muscles have to turn on in order to perform that movement. So in recovery after stroke, if you're trying to optimize your brain or keep recovering, you've got to constantly challenge your brain and put yourself in different environments or conditions where you're applying that skill, or in other words, putting your brain in enriched environments so that you can expand this blueprint, and so you can give your brain another perspective or another iteration of what it looks like to apply this skill. In other words, it's not something like practice makes perfect, but rather practice under pressure makes perfect. For example, you're more likely to improve your more likely to improve your ability to control your grasp if you're walking around a supermarket trying to hold on to a shopping bag, rather than walk around the house where there's no one else looking at you and there's no pressure for you to fail. So that's just one example. And when you think about this example, it applies to everything in stroke recovery, whether this be walking, for example, your balance, or just doing things that you would have typically done before your stroke, such as reaching for a glass of water, or making sure that you don't tip a jug of water when you're holding a glass of water and bring it to the table. So I think that this is really important, because for a lot of stroke survivors, a lot of their exercise is done within a very familiar environment. And because it's done in a very familiar environment, you tend to get stuck into routines which you do every day. And because you do these routines every day, there's no justifiable reason for your brain to actually want to recover more. And so at the end of the day, what happens is your brain actually goes through what I like to call a broken record approach, which is where a stroke survivor gets 12 sessions of insurance, and after 12 sessions of insurance, they're sent home with an exercise program. And for the next 6 months or maybe a year, until the insurance comes back, they're doing the exact same exercises that they did when they had insurance. And what this leads to is your brain being exposed to the exact same things. And what once was an enriched environment is no longer new to the brain. And because it's no longer new to the brain or challenging to the brain, your brain has no justifiable reason to improve or rewire what was lost after your stroke, so that it can actually make a better recovery and you can make the most and best possible recovery after your stroke. So at the end of the day, I think this is a really important thing to really take to heart when it comes to your recovery after stroke, because especially if you're a stroke survivor who's 1 year out after having their stroke, or you're a stroke survivor who's in a situation where maybe you're noticing that you're not seeing changes as quickly as you used to, or not at all, then this could be something to really consider, as it could be something which might just move the needle in your recovery a lot further than before and a lot quicker than before. So that's basically my 2 cents on this topic and why I think it's so important. And Ralph, earlier you and I, we were talking about this and we were going back and forth. And I know that you are a big advocate of this, having applied this heavily in your recovery as well. So just for the folks watching, I was just wondering if you want to share your personal experience of this, what you noticed when you were doing this in your own recovery, and how you think that this may help others in their recovery as well.
Well, yes, I would. And, like a lot of things, I kind of fell into this whole concept, and like a lot of things, I paid attention to everything, and I kind of noticed that it was working, and then I could try and figure out situations to apply it. How did I fall into it? A videographer, and I had a couple of simple video jobs on the books. They were both freebies, as a matter of fact, for good causes. And I really wanted to do them, so I didn't cancel them. I worried about falling over. One of them I had to stand behind the camera for all day. Anyway, I worried about whether I'd be able to do them or not, but I didn't want to cancel them. I showed up and did them. And after I did one or two of those things, people who would then ask me if I could do something, I felt a lot more confident. So that was kind of how I discovered it. And, what I discovered was that we all have our little routines that we go on around the house. You touched on this a little bit, William, that, you don't do anything much. Now, there are things you can do to apply this outside your comfort zone around the house. I'll get into them in a minute. But, you typically don't, I hate to use think outside the box. You typically get into routines, and those are not as good for learning as the situations that you get when you put yourself into certain things, like continuing to do the video shoots or taking on new jobs. These things are easier to happen if you get outside your house as well as your comfort zone, because that way you tend to break away from your routines a lot. Of course, you have to be past the I'm terrified of everybody in public stage, which a lot of us went through. Um, so, how can you, how did I end up creating situations? I ended up creating a couple of situations when I was learning to go up and down steps. I found a fairly safe place to do steps, and I worked on not holding on. First, by just sliding my hand, then hovering my hand, and then having my hand at my side, and then eventually moving out to the middle. And as you make each one of those steps, you're kind of outside your comfort zone. Now, I did that in a safe place. I started out in medical buildings, and they have real wide staircases. When I practiced like not holding on, not being near the rails, I use apartment building steps because they're typically only 4 feet wide, so you can reach on either side. And I took a picture of one at a friend's apartment recently because it had nice railings on both sides. It was a real good place to walk. I thought I'd do a post on doing stairs and how you can find good stairs. So I did that there. I also did it on the steps out here on my deck that go up to my deck. There are 4 of them, and there's no handrails. So at some point, this is tied into the you just got to go for it concept, which also works sometimes as long as you do things safely. Get outside your comfort zone and maybe just going for it. There is a railing down at the far end of the steps, and there is a wall at this end. So I tended to practice in the beginning at each end, but then eventually I just got in the middle and I tried to say, you can do this, and up you go, just like you're next to the railing, but you're not. So those were a couple of things. I also find that I've found that doing yard work around here puts you into a lot of unexpected and not pre-programmed movement. We tend to stand at counters or machines or whatever and do repetitive movements, and things like yard work. You do all kinds of complex movements to get tasks done. And the same is true like when you go out. When you go out in public, assuming that you're good with that. I'm a videographer. I had this happen to me this week. I'm helping a friend put together a video for his band, and I went to look at the band, and I took my cell phone. And I thought I'd fool around and see what I got with it and see what kind of problems I'd have before I took my big camera down there. And there was some other friends there that were well. So first of all, I get up and all of a sudden now I'm like, reaching out to get the guitar solo, and what happened? The singer went out in the audience, and you got to twist around and keep your balance and put you in situations where you're challenged like that. And that's the way your brain learns. So first of all, I had a lot of fun and some challenges, movement challenges with the camera, but you're thinking about getting the job done. So you end up like going sort of kind of back into a little bit of that automatic mode that we're all striving for. Automatic mode being, that we didn't think about any of this stuff before we had our strokes, and now we think about every darn movement out there. And then let's finish this up with, and then I was with a group of people and they were dancing. And I thought, boy, I'd like to dance, but I'm not sure about that. And I got encouraged too. Next thing I know, I'm dancing, and I realized I haven't danced since my stroke, but I'm not falling down. So it was a confidence eye opener and a confidence builder. So those are some examples that I've used in my life. So, what would I say? That you don't have these enriched environment experiences sitting on your couch. So you got to either create them around your house or get out of your house. You can apply this concept anywhere. You need to do it safely, and you need to realize what you're doing is pushing yourself. It's always best to push yourself a little bit at a time, not try and leap. Baby steps like everything else, although we all hate that term. So those are some of my thoughts on it, William.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with everything you said, Raf. And I just want to underline or highlight the part about what you said, creating these enriched environments for yourself, because I think that rings true in recovery after stroke, because you really have to keep yourself accountable. And this worked really well for myself, because in the early days of my stroke recovery, sometimes I would be reluctant to do something until I was actually put in a situation where I had to force myself to do it. For example, when I was in OT school, when we were seeing patients on a work placement, quite often in one or two scenarios there was a chair blocking my way seeing the patient. So, and now I could try to not make a fool out of myself and pick up the chair with my non-affected arm. But having done the work on my affected arm, I told myself, well, I could try to pick up the chair and try to lift up 20 pounds or 10 pounds with one arm, but it's also not going to be very fun. So I just dived right in and I picked up the chair with both arms, both hands, sorry. It was an armchair. And it ended up, one, making me not struggle at all in front of the patient. And number two, it also told me that all my hard work had paid off, because now I know I can pick up a chair with two hands rather than being fearful that other people would judge me and trying to pick it up with one arm, so that I could avoid that fear of failing and dropping that chair. So I think in recovery after stroke, something I've learned in my recovery, helping in my own journey, and also in my journey in coaching other stroke survivors, is your brain craves novelty and unpredictability. And at the end of the day, if you can create a situation where you're giving your brain something completely out of left field or completely unpredictable or completely new, your brain is more likely to latch onto that and actually recover a lot quicker, because there is a justifiable reason why it has to recover. And one thing I've seen with stroke survivors I've coached personally is every time we've introduced something new or something novel, something that their brain has never been exposed to, we often see a spike in recovery, which is why, particularly in recovery after stroke, you have all these gadgets. Which tend to help people see a short-term spike in their recovery, because the gadget in itself creates an enriched environment and gives your brain a different perspective or different way of applying whatever it's already learnt, so that it can expand that blueprint, and so it can tell itself, this is another way that I can perform this skill so that I can become a lot more efficient. And the way I like to think about this is, it's kind of like using a GPS when you're driving. So when you're getting from one destination to another, your GPS will tend to tell you to take the toll road, but there's obviously the other road where you can take the streets, or you can take the streets to get to your destination. Now, you obviously don't want to take the streets, and before your stroke, it's likely that your brain took the toll road or the highway. But if you take the streets and you expose your brain to another route to get to your destination, then your brain has another idea of how to achieve the exact same goal, although using a slower approach. And often after stroke, the way that your brain performs something, it's not going to be using the exact same part of the brain as it used to before your stroke. It's going to be using a different part of your brain to compensate for the movements which it used to perform before. So by putting the brain in situations where it's unpredictable, where it's faced with a challenge, which it typically wouldn't, then your brain can naturally adapt and put together the pieces when you're going to bed, so that it can rewire itself to become a lot more efficient, and a lot better at performing that skill. And this could be something as simple as opening the fridge door. And Ralph and I have talked about this before. You could try opening the fridge door with a really tight fist, and the first time you open it, you might find that your hand is stuck to the fridge and you can't get out. But over time, as you practice, you might notice that it becomes a lot easier to actually relax your fingers and let go of the fridge. And the same thing goes with picking up grocery bags with your hand as well. So you might find that if you're holding a grocery bag and you're trying to open your door, it's going to be hard to multitask to hold on to the bag while you're opening the door, and actually be able to open the door and like bring the bag in at the same time. But over time, you might find that with better control, you can hold on to the bag and you can control that grasp or that grip while you're opening the door, and you can bring in your groceries like you used to before your stroke. But none of this is overnight, as you can probably see from the discussion that Ralph and I are having tonight, that it all comes down to keeping yourself accountable, creating these enriched environments on the spot so that your brain has something to latch onto to actually make recovery happen for itself, and tell itself how it can adapt to become a lot better or more efficient at performing a movement or skill that you might have done before your stroke.
Okay, well, I made a note to talk about my note says endless list, and I didn't know what an enriched environment was. I didn't know what a blueprint was. I'd not even heard of neuroplasticity when I was doing all this. I, kind of had to figure it out. And this is what I did and what worked for me, and why I was always creating these enriched environments, even though I didn't know what they were. And that was because I looked at the whole thing as if I had an endless list of things to relearn and learn how to do again. And it was my job to see if I could check them off. And I was always reluctant to leave them behind. I always made sure that I really could do it before I stopped practicing doing it. But then, whenever I mastered a task, I tried to figure out how to make it more complicated and challenge my brain again. And I'll take it back to the fridge, because what I would, at first, you took it all the way back to I can't let go of the fridge. That's the early days when it's really hard to let go in the beginning, or for a long time for a lot of people. Anyway, I would then shuffle things so that I was putting things in with my affected hand. Even if I was carrying two things, I'd put one in with open the fridge with my affected hand, or set something down and do it. Now what I try and do is I've complicated to the point I was thinking about this today at lunch because I had two things in my hand, two things in my affected hand, one thing in this hand, and I took two fingers and opened the fridge door and didn't drop the two things. Same way, one day I had a bunch of tools and I went to set them down because I was going to come through a doorway, and I said, or I moved them all to my unaffected hand. And I said, no, wait a minute. Before you would have just whatever tools were in there, and I probably opened doors with my unaffected hand. Now I try and open doors with my affected hand with tools in them. So I've always upped it a notch every time. When I get to check something off, all it meant was I get to move on. And I was happy with that because I felt like I was making progress. And one more thing, and that is sometimes these things take perseverance. Before we started recording, William and I were talking about slippers, and we both did similar things with our slippers. I didn't like the fact I had to, with my unaffected foot, I could put my foot right in the slipper, and on the affected side, I had to reach down and pull the heel off. So I don't wear slippers in the summer. So every winter, I would just try it once every day and give up, or once, maybe twice a day. And I did that for 4 or 5 years. And then all of a sudden it happened. And then I put on socks because that made it harder because your feet are bigger and the socks rub on the slippers. And I learned how to do it with socks. And I said, okay, I'll learn how to do it standing up. So I did it standing up with one finger on something. Barefoot first, then socks. Then I said, okay, there's only one thing left. That would be don't hold on to anything, barefoot and socks. So I did that. We've talked about, I don't know why I wanted to be able to open the compost bucket. The same with my affected hand. So I'm constantly checking things off if I can check them off. And I don't spend my entire life going down a list and making sure I'm doing all the right therapies during the day. I learned long ago, early on, they taught me in the rehab hospital about involvement. And I started doing functional therapy from the day I got home. And so I've just kind of learned to use my hand and complicate things with it. And it's just a natural part of my routine. Like I said, today I caught myself because I had two fingers left. I was going to open the door with, and it made me think about it. But other than that, I would have just done it. So I don't know what the next step after that is. I'm pretty happy with where I am. So William, you got anything else?
No, I don't have anything else to add. The only thing I have to add is I guess when it comes to learning new movements in recovery after stroke, the quickest way to actually create that enriched environments, and a lot of you watching this have probably picked up on it, is to immediately apply to real life once you feel like you've gotten to a level where you feel you're comfortable with it. Because when you apply to real life in general throws a lot of different variables and really puts you under pressure to perform the skill. So when you're put under that pressure, your brain has to constantly adapt to all those different conditions. And because it's constantly adapting, you're essentially in a win-win scenario where your brain cannot get too comfortable. And your brain is constantly expanding its own comfort zone of how to actually perform the skill. And in Ralph's case, and also in mine, wearing the slippers, I also went through a phase where I wanted to try putting on slippers by myself on my affected foot. The first time it didn't work out so well, but after a while, I was able to learn how to plantar flex my foot down to actually slip on the slipper on my affected foot myself. So, and this all came about because I kept practicing it under pressure. And I had this movement, my brain got back to plantar flexion, and I applied it immediately to real life before I was too comfortable, so that my brain could become comfortable with becoming uncomfortable. And that in turn led to permanent learning and also improved my quality of life because now I don't have to use my non-affected hand to help put on the slip on the affected foot. So I think that's basically the last thing I have to add. And hopefully for all of you watching this, you can see how powerful and how important this is in recovery after stroke. and how crucial it is to constantly push yourself out of your comfort zone and create enriched environments by yourself, because the opportunity to exercise is not always going to be there, and it's always up to yourself to police your brain. Your brain is constantly wanting to become efficient, and it's up to yourself as a stroke survivor to guide it towards where you want it to go, ideally towards your best possible recovery or quality of life after stroke.
I totally agree with the, life throwing things at you that are good for the brain and good for recovery. In fact, when you were talking about that, I thought of something I either stupidly or wisely once said, and that was, there's no better therapy to prepare you for life than life itself. So that's my either silly or wise thought for the evening. And I guess we'll see everybody on the roadmap next time. And thanks for tuning in. And thank you, William.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.